The hollow echo. Elias Thorne was a man of precise habits and quiet nerves, which made the first tap particularly offensive. It began in the silver sedan somewhere between the rolling fog of the interstate and the sterile asphalt of the airport. It was rhythmic, 3 light, rhythmic raps against a hard surface. Tap, tap, tap. Elias muted the radio. The hum of the tires against the pavement was the only sound. He pulled over onto the shoulder, the hazard lights casting rhythmic amber pulses against the mist. He checked the glove box. Empty. He checked the back seat. Nothing but his leather suitcase. He stepped out, his breath blossoming in the cold air, and circled the vehicle. He kicked the tires and peered under the chassis. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like a knuckle on wood, coming from the trunk. Elias popped the latch. The trunk was empty save for a spare tire and a roadside emergency kit. He pressed his ear to the carpeted floor. "Hello?" he whispered, feeling foolish. Silence. Only the wind whistling through the guardrail. He chalked it up to a loose heat shield and drove on, but his grip on the steering wheel had tightened until his knuckles were the color of bone. The airport was a cathedral of glass and white noise. Elias sat in Terminal 4, clutching a lukewarm coffee, when he felt a strange vibration in his feet. Tap, tap, tap. It was louder now, coming from the hollow metal leg of the chair next to him. He looked at the woman sitting there. She was buried in a book. Elias leaned down, pretending to tie his shoe. He pressed his palm against the cold steel. He could feel the distinct impact of something small hitting the metal from the inside. "Excuse me," he said. "Do you hear that?" She looked up, blinking. "Hear what?" "The tapping. It sounds like someone is trapped." She listened for a moment, then shook her head. "Just the air conditioning, I think." Elias boarded the plane with a mounting sense of urgency. As the Boeing 747 leveled out at 30,000 feet, the cabin settled into a low drone. Elias closed his eyes, but then it returned. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the wall of the fuselage, right next to his ear. It wasn't mechanical. It had a desperate, frantic quality. Someone was in the cargo hold. Or worse, someone was trapped in the narrow insulation gap between the inner cabin wall and the outer skin of the aircraft. He pressed his face to the cold plastic. "I hear you," he hissed. He unbuckled his seatbelt and began to pace. He checked the overhead bins. He knelt in the aisle, pressing his ear to the carpeted floor. The flight attendant approached, her smile a practiced mask of concern. "Is everything all right, sir?" "There's someone under the floor," Elias said, his voice cracking. "Listen, they're trying to get out." The attendant leaned down. "I don't hear anything, sir. Perhaps it's just the luggage shifting." "It's not luggage," Elias raised his voice. "It's a person. They're tapping. Can't you hear the rhythm?" He was moved to the back of the plane and monitored for the rest of the flight. He sat shivering, his hands over his ears, but he could still feel it in his teeth. Tap, tap, tap. By the time the taxi dropped him at the Gables, a Victorian-era hotel converted into a boutique stay, Elias was a ghost of a man. His eyes were bloodshot, and his movements were jerky. "Room 412, the clerk said, handing him a heavy brass key. "It's very quiet at the end of the hall." Inside his room, Elias locked the deadbolt and pushed a heavy armchair in front of the door. He stripped off his jacket and sat on the edge of the bed. He waited. The room was silent. "It was the car," he whispered to the shadows. "It was the plane. It was the altitude." Then, from the wall behind the headboard, a wall bordered only by the exterior of the building, came the sound. Thud, thud, thud. It had evolved. No longer a light tap, it was a heavy, meaty strike. Someone was behind that wall. Elias screamed and tore the headboard away. He grabbed a heavy glass lamp and began to smash the base against the plaster. White dust filled the air like a dry fog. He dug with his fingernails, drawing blood, peeling back the lath and the dust of a century. Behind the wall was a void, a narrow vertical maintenance shaft used for old plumbing. It was dark, smelling of damp earth and ancient copper. He shoved his phone inside, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There, wedged between the rusted pipes and the brickwork, was a man. But he wasn't a guest. He was wearing a tattered, grease-stained jumpsuit from the airport ground crew. He was impossibly thin. His skin stretched like parchment over his skull. His hands were raw, his fingernails entirely gone from days of scratching. But he wasn't alone. Linked to his ankle by a heavy, rusted chain was a second figure, a thing that didn't look human anymore. It was pale, sightless, and moving with a terrifying, insect-like grace. It had been the one tapping, using the man's own hand as a mallet against the pipes to lure anyone to open the wall. The man in the jumpsuit looked at Elias, his eyes wide with a mix of apology and pure, soul-shattering terror. "Thank you," the man croaked, his voice a dry rasp. "It was so hungry, and I couldn't reach the door." Before Elias could scream, the pale thing lunged upward, its long, spindly fingers catching the edge of the broken plaster. The tapping stopped. The screaming began.